I'm more aware than I've ever been in my life of what I've got, and I don't want to lose it again.
Andy Gibb became the first solo artist in history to land his first 3 singles at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. He was 20 years old, his face covered magazine racks across America, he was co-hosting one of the biggest music shows on television, and his name carried the kind of weight that takes most artists a lifetime to build. 10 years later, his bank account held less than $1,500 in total assets. His body failed 5 days after his 30th birthday, and his daughter Peta, just 10 years old at the time, inherited nothing because he had never written a will. She watched the rumors fill in where facts were missing, heard the whispers about suicide and deliberate collapse, and stayed silent for nearly 4 decades. In January 2024, she finally broke that silence, and what she revealed shifted the entire story people thought they already knew. Andy came into the world on March 5, 1958, in Manchester, the youngest of 5 children in a household where music wasn't a side interest, but the entire atmosphere of daily life. His father had been a drummer and big band leader, and his mother brought Irish and English roots into a home that ran on rhythm and performance long before anyone outside knew the Gibb name. His 3 older brothers, Barry, Robin, and Maurice, were already rehearsing in the living room before Andy could hold anything useful. 6 months after his birth, the whole family boarded a ship called the Fair Sea and sailed to Australia under an assisted migration scheme, landing first in Redcliffe before shifting to Crib Island in January 1960. The moves kept arriving after that. Brisbane to Sydney, city to city, school to school, and Andy became the kid who was permanently starting over somewhere unfamiliar, carrying the last name of brothers who were already beginning to leave him behind in terms of experience and exposure. By January 1967, when Andy turned 8, the family returned to England, and the world he stepped into felt enormous and unsteady. Crowds gathered outside their London home every day just to catch sight of the Bee Gees, and classmates at school treated Andy with a mixture of resentment and strange fascination because of the family name he carried. More than 11 years separated him from Barry, more than 8 from Robin and Maurice, which meant he had entirely missed the period of intense musical shaping that bonded his brothers together. He was watching from the outside of something he hadn't been born early enough to join. At 13, Barry placed a guitar in his hands, and that one gesture changed the direction of everything. Andy practiced late into the nights that followed, not to imitate the Bee Gees, but to find something that belonged only to him. By 1972, at just 14, he was already performing in tourist clubs in Ibiza, working long, loud nights with unpredictable crowds and no safety net of recognition to fall back on. Those years in Ibiza gave him something no studio session could manufacture, a raw and practical understanding of how to hold a room's attention when no one in that room had any particular reason to care who you were. In 1974, at 15, he moved to Sydney to live with his sister Leslie, and the city hit him like oxygen after years of suffocation. Sydney was his spiritual home, he said later, because it carried warmth and possibility that he hadn't felt anywhere else he'd lived. Cole Joy, one of Australia's genuine rock and roll pioneers, recognized his potential and brought him properly into the Sydney music scene. From 1974 to 1976, Andy performed throughout the city with his first band, Melody Fair, alongside Isle of Man musicians John Alderson and John Stringer. In November 1974, he recorded 6 demos with Cole Joy, including tracks called Words and Music, Westfield Mansions, and Flowing Rivers. And these weren't warm-up exercises. They were the first solid evidence that Andy Gibb had something original to offer the world. His debut commercial single, Words and Music, released in late 1975 across Australia and New Zealand, wasn't a massive chart success, but it was enough to prove he could create without borrowing anything from his brothers, and that proof mattered to him more than any chart position could. In June 1976, Barry called and told him to come to Miami. Andy didn't deliberate long. On July 11, 1976, he married Kim Reeder at Wayside Chapel in Sydney, and their honeymoon took them to Robert Stigwood's house in Bermuda, where Barry was already waiting to begin shaping Andy's debut album. By September 1976, Andy and Kim arrived in Miami and stepped directly into the creative momentum surrounding the Bee Gees. Criteria Studios was alive with energy that season. The Eagles were finishing Hotel California in that same building when Andy arrived to begin recording Flowing Rivers around October 1976. Joe Walsh played on 2 tracks. Barry guided the sessions as executive producer, while Carl Richardson and Albie Galutin shaped the overall sound, and the album was finished in just a few weeks, full of live band takes, strings, and horns that gave it a warmth most debut records never managed to find. When Flowing Rivers came out in September 1977, it climbed into the top 20 on the Billboard 200 and sold over 1 million copies. His first single, I Just Want to Be Your Everything, reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 on July 30th, 1977, and held that position for 4 weeks, making him the youngest solo male artist ever to reach that spot at 19 years old. Love is Thicker Than Water followed and hit number 1 in March 1978, and on March 4th of that year, it replaced Stayin' Alive by the Bee Gees at the top of the chart, creating a moment where both Andy Gibb and his brothers occupied the peak of popular music simultaneously. Recording for his second album, Shadow Dancing, had begun in December 1977 and wrapped by February 1978, with sessions split between Wally Heider Studios in Los Angeles and Criteria Studios in Miami. Carl Richardson later said the band was so tight they jokingly called themselves the Andy Gibb Hit Orchestra. The title track dropped in April 1978, climbed to number 1 on June 17, 1978, and stayed there for 7 consecutive weeks, becoming the biggest-selling single of the entire year, moving more than 2.5 million copies in the United States alone. Shadow Dancing reached number 7 on the Billboard 200, charted in the United Kingdom, and pushed Andy into the history books as the first solo artist ever to land his first 3 singles at number 1. 2 more singles from the album broke into the top 10, and Everlasting Love at number 5 and Our Love, Don't Throw It All Away at number 9. At 20 years old, he had built something that most artists never build in a lifetime, and the weight of maintaining it was already beginning to show. The cracks underneath the success had been forming long before anyone outside the industry noticed them. Kim Reeder later said cocaine became Andy's first love before Peta was born, that it made him paranoid and pulled him away from anyone trying to reach him. Their daughter arrived on January 25, 1978, 10 days after their divorce was finalized, and Andy never found enough steadiness to be fully present for her. In 1978, he began dating Marie Osmond, and producer Albie Galutin described the pairing as impossible from the start because Andy was deep in his addiction while Marie didn't even drink soda. Obsessive late-night calls eventually pushed her family to take legal action to stop him from contacting her. She later admitted she regretted delivering the breakup through a blunt phone message, but she had recognized she couldn't save him without losing herself entirely. Victoria Principal came into his life in 1981 on The John Davidson Show. She was 31 and already a star on Dallas, and Andy was 23 with a smile that still lit up rooms without effort. 13 months of photographs and public appearances followed. Their duet, All I Have to Do Is Dream, came out during this period and reached number 51. And then Victoria gave him the choice between sobriety and the drugs. He chose the drugs, and she stepped away in March 1982, just days before his 24th birthday. Andy told People magazine afterward that he stopped caring about anything, that he fell completely apart, that he was spending roughly $1,000 a day on cocaine, which by today's measure would be more than $3,000. He stayed awake for 2 straight weeks at one point, wouldn't leave his room, and let producers' messages accumulate while his career quietly dismantled itself around him. Solid Gold let him go in the spring of 1982 after too many missed tapings. Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat offered a Broadway stage that could have redirected everything, but within 6 weeks he missed 12 performances, begged producers Zev Buffman and Susan Ross not to fire him, promised to fix it, and then missed another show. The Pirates of Penzance in Los Angeles repeated the same collapse. 3 major opportunities in 3 years, all dissolved the same way. By the mid-1980s, his vocal cords showed the damage of years of substance abuse. His relationship with his brothers carried the strain of every relapse and broken promise, and Marie Osmond later said she had taken legal action to stop the Bee Gees from sending him money because their generosity was feeding the problem rather than solving it. His family got him into the Betty Ford Clinic in 1985. 6 weeks of structure and therapy passed. He walked out carrying something that looked like the beginning of recovery, and then the addiction pulled him back again. In 1985, his income had fallen to $24,207. By 1986, it dropped further to $7,655. On September 10, 1987, he filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, listing total assets of $1,132.79 against debts exceeding $1 million. He was living rent-free in a Florida penthouse with furniture his brothers had lent him, the same man who once earned $50,000 per show and more than $3 million from shadow dancing alone. Peta received nothing, not a dollar, not a document with her name on it. January 1988 brought one final opening when Island Records agreed to sign him, and Barry helped arrange the terms. All Andy needed to do was appear and sign. Anxiety kept him from every meeting. The contract was never signed, and the album was never begun. He had quietly earned his pilot's license in 1987, a fact almost no one knew at the time, and it suggested a version of himself that still believed in a future, someone who talked about flying, about joining the Bee Gees for their 1989 album, about things that existed just past where he could actually reach. On March 7, 1988, 2 days after his 30th birthday, he checked into John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford with severe chest pains. On March 10th, he collapsed and never regained consciousness. The cause was myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle that had been weakened over years of substance abuse. His cardiologist, William Schell, stated plainly that his heart simply could not fight anymore. Andy had been sober for more than a year, but the damage the earlier years had done was not reversible. Peta was 10 when her father died. She grew up knowing him mostly through phone calls and brief visits that always ended too soon. The rumors that followed his death, about suicide and intentional self-destruction, circulated for decades, while she offered nothing to contradict or confirm them. In January 2024, she launched the official Andy Gibb website, filling it with photographs and memories the public had never seen, and she spoke for the first time about who her father actually was underneath everything the headlines had described. Her words carried the particular weight of someone who had waited a very long time to say them accurately. He didn't die from heart disease alone. He died because he hated himself. That sentence put a human being back where the tragedy had been. A man who loved deeply, chased his own identity through every city and stage he performed on, dreamed constantly about what still might be possible, and carried a self-loathing so heavy that no amount of history-making success had ever come close to lifting it.